The Yakuza series is a long and sprawling one. There is so many damn games in this franchise, it's hard to count them all sometimes. And I sometimes get confused seeing what games I should play in order and what games really add to the story. But somehow RGG has developed all these games with each of them having their own unique flair and something unique to offer to the player, which makes all of them worth playing in my opinion. I haven't played all the Yakuza games and I'm currently on Yakuza 4, but through playing the series over the years, I wanted to discuss why I love this series so much and how it has kept me engaged over the years I've been playing through it. Like many of you, my first experience with this fantastic series was with Yakuza 0 back in 2021 when Xbox decided to chuck the entire series onto Xbox Game Pass pretty unexpectedly after the series was known as a PlayStation exclusive series. I'm currently on my 4th game in the franchise and I thought I would be burnt out by now, although I have been having some big breaks between games. I played Yakuza 3 about 6 or 7 months back and then Yakuza Kiwami 2 about 6 or 7 months before that as well, so I've really spaced out my playthroughs of the game. But because of that, I've enjoyed every single moment I've played of all of these games from Yakuza 0 to now Yakuza 4, even with their various ups and downs. I would still consider Yakuza 0 my favorite game in the series, and I would probably put it in my top 10 games of all time. But I understand that RGG had a lot of experience by the time that they created Yakuza 0, so a lot of these other games that I've been playing through, such as Yakuza 3 and 4, are going to be outdated by Yakuza 0's metrics and the experience that RGG now has. But I've still really enjoyed my time with all of these games, and Yakuza 4 has been an absolute blast for me so far. It's been a lot of fun playing through the series, and each game definitely has their own flair and interesting component to them that makes them stand out to the crowd that is all the other Yakuza games. For example, for me, Yakuza 3 really shined on its character moments and the manner in which it showed the development of Kiryu over the games from Yakuza 0, Yakuza Kiwami, Yakuza Kiwami 2, and now with Yakuza 3, with him trying to settle in as not being a Yakuza anymore, but being dragged into that life once more, as his leadership and power are once again needed by the Tojo clan. Then of course we have my favorite game in the series, Yakuza 0, which compels in every single regard, from the game's story, gameplay, and all the sub-stories that the game has to offer. Talking about the stories of these games, that's my main reason for playing these games. They have such weird and wacky stories and characters, which really makes them interesting to play through every single time, seeing what else that RGG is going to spin up this time. I've been playing through Yakuza 4, and the fact that you play as 4 different protagonists throughout the game is a really interesting concept to me, and so far it's been done quite well, as I've really enjoyed the sections where I had to play as Saejima or Akiyama, for example, and I think I'm on the 3rd part of the game, and I don't know what protagonist I'm going to be playing as yet, but I'm excited to see what else the game has to offer. But my favorite story in the series is definitely Yakuza 0, and generally the stories of these games are quite fantastic every single time. Even Yakuza 3, which I would consider my least favorite in the series for obvious reasons, such as the game's combat system, I would still consider it having a great story, and I really enjoyed every single moment of Yakuza 3's story like I did for Yakuza Kiwami or Kiwami 2. The stories of these games are quite fantastic, as they always mix up the seriousness with the goofiness so well, and I haven't seen any other developer do that to the same degree of RGG. These characters and locations are so interesting to delve into every single time, and for example, I thought I would be bored of exploring Kamurocho again and again throughout these games, and I've heard that the rest of the series still uses the same location of Kamurocho, but somehow in some way I am not bored of Kamurocho yet. Everything in this city is so interactable, and it really adds to the story and the overall vibe of this place, that this is really a world that's lived in. I think many games out there fail to capture that in their story or the general world of the game, but here in Kamurocho, in every single Yakuza game, or even in Okinawa in Yakuza 3, these locations feel so lived in and so real that the world is still going on without you and your actions in the game. It's a really interesting thing that RGG has done with Kamurocho, using the same locations over and over again, and I've seen that this has allowed them to make multiple games in a year, such as in the last year where they released 3 different Yakuza games, and even if one of them is a remake, that is super impressive by any developer's accounts. But even though RGG heavily reuses assets and use Kamurocho as the main place for every single Yakuza game, it makes Kamurocho interesting every single time. And I think what really helps in this department is the fact that almost everything in Kamurocho feels like it is interactable. The fact that I can walk into this many stores and this many locations and this many restaurants is really appealing to the player fantasy of trying to live in this world, and Kamurocho progressively throughout these games feels like you can interact with more and more different things, and this is definitely helped by the game's sub-stories. Substories. This might be considered a crime in the Yakuza community, but I really mostly play these games for their main stories, and I don't really dabble in the wacky stuff or the sub-stories because I'm just trying to get through my backlog. But recently, I've been trying to delve more into the sub-stories of these games, and there is so much here to do with the sub-stories. Many people look like they just play these games for the sub-stories, and I can see why for many reasons. All the sub-stories and little mini-games that are all attached to Yakuza as a package are really interesting and different every single time. For example, one of the sub-stories that I did do in Yakuza Kiwami 2 was where you had to confront the imposter of Kiryu in Kamurocho. This was a really interesting sub-story, and seeing how this imposter of Kiryu used the power and fear that Kiryu has in Kamurocho to intimidate others was really interesting, and I really thought it was a fun and engaging sub-story even though it was quite short. I think the very wackiness and weird nature of these sub-stories spread out through all of the Yakuza games is what makes them so engaging. The fact that the main story is always so brooding and serious with all these different complex connections to the Tojo clan or this clan and all these different families fighting together, playing through these sub-stories that are wacky and weird compared to the serious nature of the game's main story creates a really nice contrast between the sub-stories and the main story. And when you mix them two together, you have a really interesting game that has both sides of the spectrum, having this weird and wacky nature even though the main story does have that, then having this really serious crime drama on the other side. Speaking of a crime drama, I think we've got to talk about the gameplay because that's got to be one of my favorite components of the Yakuza series overall across all of the games. The gameplay here in Yakuza is so much fun, and I'm not just talking about the mini games or the little things you can do such as go in the Sega arcade, although I do enjoy doing those little things. I just want to talk about the brawler combat here. From Yakuza 0 to Yakuza 4, I've had so much fun with the combat in this game, especially with Yakuza 0 and Kiwami. Switching between 3 different styles for Kiryu and for Majima in Yakuza 0 was a really interesting mechanic and made the combat diverse through the entire 30 hours that I spent in Yakuza 0. Yakuza 0 has the longest main story that I've played through in the series so far, but the fact that the gameplay and the brawler combat was so much fun in every single encounter, even seeing me go through to find an encounter myself so I could engage with the combat more, made the story that much more fun because I was having so much fun with the gameplay and the boss fights. And the boss fights here are also one of my favorite components in the games. There has been some frustrating moments with the gameplay and the boss fights of these Yakuza games. For example, Yakuza Kiwami's boss fights, all of them were super frustrating and annoying, especially every single boss fight where the person had a gun and then you get shot down and have to get up every 2 seconds. Those were the most annoying boss fights in the series, but so far I haven't encountered more of those annoying boss fights since playing Yakuza Kiwami. Seeing 2 men with conflicting ideals in the Yakuza take off their shirts and seeing the tattoos on their back representing who they are as people and then brawling it out on top of a rooftop, for example, as most of the games do, is really fun. And the boss fights in these games are some of my favorite boss fights in any game ever. The stakes are always super high, and the dialogue between the 2 characters during the boss fight, before and after it, are really interesting and well done by all accounts. Of course, the combat systems in these games aren't the most complex things ever, but the fact that you can do these heat actions once you build up a heat meter, for example, and seeing these different animations for different characters across the games is super fun and makes the combat constantly engaging. I really did think I would be bored of the brawler combat by now, but the heat actions, the upgrades, and the different abilities that you can get to upgrade yourself throughout the game makes it super fun every single time I play a Yakuza game, and it always feels so refreshing and satisfying all the time. Of course, the combat systems across these games isn't exactly perfect. For example, Yakuza 3's combat system made me want to rip my hair out every single time I played it or every single time I got into an enemy encounter by accident. But that doesn't mean the strengths of the franchise's combat system overall isn't always there. Yakuza 4 looks like it definitely built on Yakuza 3's wrongdoings, and I really do hope that Yakuza 5 improves on that even more, because from what I understand, Yakuza 3 to 5 use an older engine, where Yakuza 6 and onwards use a new engine called the Dragon engine. So I'm guessing Yakuza 6's combat is going to be drastically different to that of Yakuza 5 or Yakuza 4, for example. And I really hope that Yakuza 6 has a better combat system than Yakuza 3 through 5, because although I do enjoy the combat of Yakuza 3 to 5, there is a lot of faults in the combat system that isn't present in Kiwami or Kiwami 2, for example, for me personally. Overall, there's just so much to the Yakuza series, from the characters, the stories, the gameplay, even if it is annoying sometimes through some of the Yakuza games. They're all just so riveting in their own ways, and each of them deserve a playthrough if you are playing through this fantastic series. If you haven't already tried this series, I definitely recommend you play this series, and if you already played the series and enjoying it, comment down down what's your favorite Yakuza game down below. Anyway, that's all from me for today's video. If you did enjoy, consider subbing to the channel and dropping a like, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.